That's it.
We'll accept that.
Huh?
I said we'll accept that.
Trust and obey. You know, it's a really important part for God to show you the way. If you don't listen, if you don't trust Him, and worse yet if you don't obey. And I don't understand why we would not trust Him or why we would not obey if we trust Him. Are you always obedient? Huh? So what is it? Is that a matter of trust? Or just plain old rebellion? Yeah, combination of both perhaps. Well, I was actually planning to do something in Ecclesiastes, and then it moved into this. It helps to know God is about when things start to go south. Are you familiar with that terminology, things going south? I don't know what it is about south, right? But it's I guess down, huh? Things start to go down south, and so it takes off from there. We're going to see in the account of Joseph, because that's what we're looking at today. What was that? Going south. The mouth goes south. Oh, the chin. Oh, I see. This part. Okay. We start to sag. That's the idea, huh? Anybody need a pen? I got some affirmations from people this morning that they actually like the handouts, and it's good to know because it's a whole lot of work. When I see them laying blank on the chair after I leave, I feel like, oh my goodness. Well, we're going to look at the life of Joseph, and it's a long story. It's like chapter 37 through 50 or 40 plus, some 50, I believe. It's a bunch of chapters, and so it would really be a good account to go through piece by piece, but as I think about it, then we want to get Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in there, so that would be a bit more ambitious, but not a bad thing to do. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at lessons from the life of Joseph, things that apply to all of us, but we get to see them playing out in Joseph's life, and our challenge today will be to personalize it. How do these things that Joseph is experiencing, that are difficulties, things starting to go south, how do we apply those to ourselves? Because things can unexpectedly fall apart. And so here we go. It helps to know God is about when things start to go south. So we're going to look at the very first lesson. And I'll give it to you, and then we'll read the passage that goes along with it. Even when you think you're doing right, things can suddenly go south. We just read, or we just sang, trust and obey, but obedience doesn't promise a privileged life on easy street. The prosperity gospel may promote that. But the gospel of Jesus Christ and biblical reality prove otherwise, as Joseph's life shows. Reality versus fantasy. There's this tendency in our religious outlook to sometimes grab hold of fantasy and hold on to things that aren't even valid. And so we don't want to be doing that. Sometimes easy street turns out to be a dead end. Yeah? You don't want to be thinking you're on easy street and then all of a sudden it appears to be a dead end. And that's what happens in Joseph's life. But let's hold on to this reality that it appears to be a dead end. Now there's plenty of dead ends in people's lives, right? We make our plans, but God, it's His plans that prevail. And just when you think things are looking up or couldn't get any worse, things can suddenly go south. Joseph had done nothing wrong. He was faithful and obedient to his father and most of all to God. Joseph had integrity, and that's what we're going to see here. Jacob, looking at Genesis 37, 3 through 4. You can follow along, but we'll bounce around to different places in the Bible, and some of the references in your handout may not be correct anyway. But Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children. Do you see a problem there? There's a big problem there. Because Joseph had been born to him in his old age, when Rachel wasn't able to give birth, until they were quite old and advanced in years, and, well, fine. That was a blessing to him, but he especially loved Joseph. Now you remember that Jacob had his wife, and his other wife that he worked 7 years for, or did it turn out to be 14? 14 years for. He really loved Rachel, but he was given Leah by his brother, by his uncle Laban, who was a deceiver like her, that flowed right down the line into Jacob. Anyway, not to get distracted there, but remember, Jacob bore children by Leah and then the maidservants of his 2 wives. And so we had a large blended family. And you can imagine in a blended family like that, with different wives, where there was constantly competition between the wives for the greatest position of love and recognition, that would have flowed into the family. So what we see here is a dysfunctional family. It goes way back. It's not the beginning of favoritism, because Jacob himself was a favorite of his mother, Rebekah. While Esau, her husband, Isaac, her husband, preferred Esau. And so we see this going way back, and we could go back one more generation, because the sins of the father pass on from generation to generations, let's say father and mother. We see evidence of that. We also see it refuted later on, but we see evidence of that, and we can see it in reality in our own lives, that what you see is oftentimes the family picture that you are most familiar with, and you practice it yourself. But way back in the day, Abraham, on his wife's suggestion to fulfill God's promise of having this multitude of children and all that, proposed that since she couldn't bear children, that he should have a child by Hagar, her maidservant. But when the baby was born, who's Ishmael, Abraham loved him, but Sarah became bitter towards her and resented her and said, "Send that slave woman away with her son. If they live, they live. If they don't, they don't. It's fine with me. Just get rid of them." Well, it says that Abraham was grieved by that, and it makes sense. It was his biological child. But I want you to hold on to this idea of Ishmael, because he was the child of the slave women that was rejected because it was of man's works and not the promise that God had made. So hold on to that, because we're going to visit Ishmael again. Reading on, so one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them, and they couldn't say a kind word to him. Anyone grow up in a family like that? I hope not. There are families like that where there's hostility. I hear of people who haven't talked to a sibling in 20 years. There's something missing, something wrong there. Are you familiar with the play Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat? Are you familiar with that? It was a Lloyd Webber musical, and it was quite fantastic. I took my family to see it done in a smaller scale. It wasn't the Broadway play. Lessons from the Life of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat was the title of that play. And it was wonderful. We were having a good time watching it until it got to the point where Joseph is being seduced by Potiphar's wife, and then they put a spin on it and had Joseph seducing Potiphar's wife. You know, but you know what? You take these things and you don't approve of them, you don't like it, you might walk out. But you know what? You can use it as a teaching moment, because my sons were young and I could show them, that's not what the Bible says. That's not true, and it distorts the whole story, the whole purpose, the whole point. And it puts Joseph's integrity, takes it down south, throws it in the dumpster. Well, so you've got that part. One night, Joseph, and I'll go back, Joseph, that pompous punk little brother, I just want to classify him the way his older brothers would have looked at him. Joseph, that pompous punk little brother, is at home living the dream. He's a daddy's boy. He's not out there herding the sheep. No. One night, Joseph had a dream. And when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field, tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly, my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. What do you think? Does that sound a little arrogant? Nope. It sounds a little arrogant to me if I think about it. Maybe Joseph was just naive. He was a young man of 17. He's having these dreams. I don't think he knew what to do with the dreams yet. I think it was something that God was imparting to him. And now he's got this dream, and he's just sort of making conversation. Listen to this dream. But he might not think about what it meant, but his brother sure understood what he was saying. And if he did think about it, he should have considered how he would go about expressing it. His brothers responded, so you think you will be our king, do you? You actually think you will reign over us? Well, surely that's what was depicted there. And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. Up till now, at least his dad is in his corner, but here's what happens next. Soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. Listen, I have had another dream, he said. The sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed down before me. Not only you 11, but Mom and Pop too. No, I'd hate to think that he was thinking that way. So far, Dad was in his corner. But this time, he told the dream to his father as well, to his brothers, but his father scolded him. What kind of a dream is that, he asked. Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? You little punk. But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dreams meant. I think Dad knew that, hey, Jacob had dreams. He had his head on a rock, and he was sleeping in a ladder lower down. Right? He had some awareness of this, and so he held on to this. It makes me think of Mary, who treasured these things up in her heart that she heard spoken by Simeon and perhaps even by the angel Gabriel, that were beyond her, couldn't quite grasp it, but you hold these things because they're important, and someday they will make sense to you, you hope. A parent is much more inclined than a sibling to want to know about what God might be revealing that he has in store for his child. So we proceed. Soon after this, Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. When they had been gone for some time, Jacob said to Joseph, your brothers are pasturing the sheep at Shechem. Get ready, and I will send you to them. I'm ready to go, Joseph said. He sure seems like kind of a happy-go-lucky guy, kind of a foolish one in a way. Go and see how your brothers and the flocks are getting along, Jacob said. Then come back and bring me a report. So Jacob sent him on his way, and Joseph traveled to Shechem from their home in the valley of Hebron. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. As he approached, they made plans to kill him. Here comes the dreamer, they said. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. But when Reuben heard of the scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. Let's not kill him, he said. Why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him into this empty cistern here in the wilderness. Then he'll die without our laying a hand on him. We'll just starve him to death in the bottom, or maybe he'll drown. I don't know. Sink in the mud. Well, they were envious to the degree of hatred. Even so, God had provided a special arrangement for Joseph by giving him a brother named Reuben, who said, let's not do that. No, let's not kill him. Let's not have blood on our hands. Let's look for another way. Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph. He says, let's not do that. He's not telling them, I plan on hoisting him out of here. When Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. It sounded like a good idea. Let's do that. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. Is that just a coincidence? Sometimes we think things in life are a coincidence. One thing is not connected to another, but we need to allow that God is connected to all things. God is involved. Even the things that we think are bad, we would think, oh, God, where were you when I was thrown in the cistern? Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. It wasn't a place where he would drown. You might write this in. God's presence and purposes aren't limited to pleasant places or peaceful seasons. We might want to think that we get this connection with God when we're on the mountaintop. No, oftentimes it's in the deepest valleys, in the cistern below. What seems like a coincidence in our daily lives or just good luck might just be God's hand of blessing and protection on you to preserve you for his greater purpose, as it was with Joseph. This was personalized for me. I've shared a little bit of it along the way. When I recently drove off the edge with my tractor into a pit and it rolled over and was on its side, and amazingly I was able to step clear of it. But the wheel was still turning because the engine was still running, and I had to get under there and try and find out how. I thought I should do that. Get under there and shut it off. And just as I did, it started coming over, and I stepped back. There was all kinds of branches and things to tangle up in, but I managed to avoid being crushed. You know what? And with that, because I've had so many close calls, I had to consciously say, thank you, Lord, you are protecting me. Why? I don't deserve any more of your protection. It's hard as a rock. You know, and so we have these opportunities to recognize God is in the midst of everything, and he wants us to come out on top. And I got the real sense that, you know, don't take his grace in vain. Don't continue to do the same kinds of things. It's selfish. It's not just what will happen to me. It's the impact it will have on my wife, my family, people I care about, people who care about me. And so it's important that we don't just take these things as just another day in the life. Then, just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming toward them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Ishmaelites, the very one that Sarah had said get that slave woman out of here, the one that bore Ishmael, who would be a half-brother to Isaac. And God made a promise. There's a whole good story about Hagar and Ishmael being out there, and she is one of the very first to give God a name. He is the God who sees me, because she was in despair, no water left, and then she finds what she needs to continue. And he says, now go back to your mistress and be obedient to her. So the Ishmaelites, God even uses the rejected ones from us. He will even use them. He made the best of what would have otherwise just been a bad situation. Judah said to his brothers, what is to be gained by killing our brother and concealing his blood? Come, let us sell him to these Ishmaelites instead of doing away with him ourselves. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers agreed. Who said this? This time it wasn't Reuben. Now, many Bible translations will give you both of them being Reuben, but this one says it was Judah. So here again, God is providing a way for Jacob to be spared. What's to be gained? The Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took him to Egypt. When Joseph was taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased by, you know this name, Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Potiphar is actually a title. So he's called Potiphar just as Pharaoh is called Pharaoh, which means king. He might have had he had other names. Pharaoh Tutankhamun, for instance. He was purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer. Potiphar was captain of the guard for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. The Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. What's happening here? He started at the top with the coat of many colors and the preferred son of his father, and he went way down, all the way down into the bottom of a cistern before he was sold to Ishmaelite traders, taken to Egypt, sold again on the open market, slave market, to Potiphar, who buys him and says, oh my gosh, look what I got. The Lord was with Joseph. So Joseph succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. And he's in my house. Yes. Have you ever had an experience like that where it seemed like, all of the worst was about to happen, and then it turned around and you found that you were positioned in a good place to be upwardly mobile, to just be yourself and have something really, really worthwhile to offer that others would benefit from? I hope you've experienced that, because God wants us to experience that. That's what this story is conveying to us. I don't like calling it a story. I like thinking of it as an account, right? Because it could just be another mythical story. I believe it's true. Well, this pleased Potiphar that Joseph was so successful, that God was with him. So he soon made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge of his entire household and everything he owned. And from the day Joseph was put in charge of his master's household and property, the Lord began to bless Potiphar's household for Joseph's sake. He's looking out for Joseph, and let the blessings just flow out and land wherever they may. Now Joseph was well built and handsome. I think it's significant that the Bible says that. He was well built and handsome. And after a time, his master's wife looked at him with longing and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, as long as I am here, my master does not give a thought to anything in the house and has entrusted to me all that he owns. He's withheld from me nothing but you, since you are his wife. How then could I do this great wrong and sin against God?" The other night we were talking about David saying after he sinned with Bathsheba, confessing to God, "Against you alone have I sinned." And all right, so when you sin against God, it affects a lot of people. He would have sinned against God first before he sinned with Bathsheba, because he knew it was wrong. He would also have been sinning against Potiphar, but he would be sinning against himself and against everything that God had planned for him. Joseph flees the attempted seduction by Potiphar's wife. That's just a heading. Although she spoke to him day after day, he would not agree to lie with her or even be near her. Just steer clear. One day, she laid hold of him by his cloak, saying, "Lie with me." But leaving the cloak in her hand, he escaped and ran outside. I jump ahead a few verses. But she kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. Then she told him this story: "That Hebrew slave you brought us came to me to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." I think that, as with many wealthy, prominent leaders, I suspect Potiphar had found himself a trophy bride. Can you picture that? He had this hot wife that needed a real man, a handsome man, like Joseph. But he resisted. Lesson 2. God is with you in the middle of I pluralize this, messes. He's with you in the middle of the mess. Let's pluralize that, because we have more than one mess in our life at any given time, much less across the span of our life. Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her. So he took Joseph and threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held. And there he remained. I'm not inserting this, verse 21, but the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. The Bible says it, the account says that, but the Lord was with Joseph in the prison. He's with him in the cistern. He's with him in the prison. He's with him in all of his life and showed him his faithful love. Kind of makes you want to go to prison, doesn't it? No? Shouldn't have to do that. The Lord was clearly with Joseph. When Reuben spared his life and he was sold to the Ishmaelites, God was even using Ishmael's family to achieve his purposes. Downstream, many years later. And again we see that. The Lord was with him. What we need to do is personalize this. Can you apply this to the mess you find yourself in? Does anyone have any kind of mess going on in their life? I do. Yeah, no, there's this kind of mess, but then there's just the accumulation of garbage. That's another mess. But we have messy lives. I find that right now my whole family is in transition. You know the transition Nancy and I are in as we try to figure out how we're going to work out a retirement so that you can have better representation and we can have a taste of life other than what the pastorate requires. Our son Darren is living with us in transition because the company that he worked for didn't recognize what he was giving to them, what he was doing for them, and didn't want to make it possible for him to even afford to live in San Luis Obispo or surrounding area. And so he is in transition, living with us until he finds a new line of work and a new home and life to continue. Our son Tyson, is in transition. living at this point in time in Spain and going through the same kind of things in his gal's life of the ex not allowing the child to be seen by the other parent, by Maria, as happened in Tyson's life. It's a mess. It's a harsh transition that's all-consuming. God, I wish he understood, I wish he knew that God is with him in this mess. He doesn't know that. He's the one I often pray for. I pray for both of my sons and my wife, but it often starts out with Tyson. Lord, Tyson grew up in the faith. Bring him back. Bring him back. Won't make his life all better, but at least he'll be aware that you're in it and he can look for you. He can see you. It's a related verse, but it's not from Genesis. Isaiah says this, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. That's good news. It says you can pass through these hard, difficult situations without being consumed by them. Lesson 2. God is with you in the middle of the mess, as we're going to continue with that. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. Wow, this guy's got good stuff. He rises to the top. He winds up in the worst of positions, and he shouldn't have been in prison at all. It was the lie of Potiphar's wife that put him there. He was serving Potiphar properly, obediently, rightly, and yet a lie of his wife caused him to be cast into prison. But even there in prison, he rises to the top because the Lord is with him. The Lord was with Joseph and caused everything he did to succeed. Well, he's always with us, and that's why Hebrews 13:5 slips in a reminder, as the Bible does in so many places. Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. You can be in the pit, you can be in prison, wherever you are, I am with you. I will not leave you, nor will I forsake you. Lesson 3. God may have you in the southbound lane for a greater purpose. That's what this is really all about. Even in prison, the dreamer's sufferings were not wasted. We had a little book by a couple who were part of the ukulele band. The husband led the ukulele band. You remember them being here? Their daughters, 2 teenage daughters, had been killed in a tragic automobile accident, broadsided by a drunk driver. Some of you know this story. They were just coming from Beach Fest with Luis Palau and thousands of people, young people gathered. They were doing the right thing. Them and their daughters coming from a great religious Christian revival on the beach, an outreach, and get hit by a drunk driver, broadsided, and their 2 daughters die. They wrote a little book called Not Wasted because they knew their daughters were saved, and they actually built a relationship with the mother who was in jail, and they became very close, and the mother came to faith. And so they saw, God used our daughters. He took them from us. He used them to bring this woman into the kingdom. Their lives were not wasted. Boy, when we can reframe our thinking that way, when we can look at all the things that we consider the absolute worst thing that can happen, and that would sure qualify, would it not? You're trying to do all the right things. You're doing them in the best way you can. And yet, even in prison, the dreamer's sufferings were not wasted. It was his key to advancement. In fact, being in the prison, being a dreamer, After he had been in custody for some time, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in the jail, both had dreams on the same night. I'm going to skip through much of this. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they looked disturbed. So he asked Pharaoh's officials, who were with him in custody in his master's house, "Why do you look so troubled today?" They answered him, "We have had dreams, but there is no one to interpret them." Joseph said to them, and I love this, "Do interpretations not come from God? Please tell me the dreams." He gives God the credit for it. No, I don't have any special capacity here, but God gets the credit for what he will allow me to do if you tell me what your dream is. Let's see. Let's see what happens. Move ahead because it's going to repeat and time would take too long to do it all. Pharaoh, therefore, had Joseph summoned. Wait a minute. Did I miss one? Well, Pharaoh has a troubling dream. It goes from the baker and the cupbearer to Pharaoh. Pharaoh, therefore, had Joseph summoned because he had heard this. And they hurriedly brought him from the dungeon after he shaved and changed his clothes. That's an interesting little piece. Hey, we're going to clean you up a little bit. And then he came to Pharaoh. Pharaoh then said to Joseph, "I had a dream, but there was no one to interpret it. But I hear it said of you, if he hears a dream, he can interpret it." And here comes Joseph again. "It's not I," Joseph replied to Pharaoh, "but God who will respond for the well-being of Pharaoh. God will interpret the dream and give the words to me for your well-being." Darren was talking about how when the Jews were in Babylon, in captivity, the message came from Jeremiah, I believe, for them to be part of the surroundings, to pray for the peace of the city, to want the best even for your enemies. Pharaoh wasn't Joseph's enemy, but he certainly wasn't his best friend. But God will respond for the well-being of Pharaoh. Brings us to lesson 3. God may have you in the southbound lane for a greater purpose. I think that's still part of this part. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to preserve many people alive. That'll be the last thing that we want to bring up, but I inserted here. God's preparation often includes detours, delays, and disappointments. Preparation is the only thing you need to write in there, but keep it in mind, detours, delays, and disappointments, all kinds of things that make you feel like you are losing ground. Joseph's trials positioned him to save many lives by God's plan and timing. Even in prison, this dreamer's sufferings were not wasted. It was his key to advancement. There's a little bit of repeat here, but it doesn't hurt us to be reminded. Joseph's trials positioned him to save many lives in God's plan and timing. You meant evil. Who's he talking to here, where this passage comes in? He's talking to his brothers. His brothers who didn't know he was alive, whose brothers could never have imagined that he had risen to this position of power and authority. And they were so upset when they found out, they thought, he's going to get even with us. They projected their vindictiveness upon him and thought, hey, we deserve the worst from him. But Joseph says, what you meant for evil against me, God meant it for good in order to preserve many people alive. And of course, we're talking about the Egyptians in the time of a famine when even Jacob sends his family from Canaan to get food from Egypt. Hold on. Lesson 4, God isn't finished yet. This is something for us to really hold on to. God isn't finished yet. Is he finished with you? Everybody here, is he finished with you? Yeah, but you have to hold on to that, because just because you're here, you might think, hey, I've done my time, I'm ready to chill and just, retire and relax. God's not finished yet. Romans 8:28 makes it clear, and we know that all things work together for good for them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28. Few summary points here. We must learn to not only trust in God's presence, but also in his timing. He's on his own time clock. We want it now. We want it our way. But when we begin to trust in God, we also can begin to trust in his timing. Joseph wouldn't see the big picture in the story God was writing through him for many years. It was unfolding before his eyes. He was going through all of these various transitions and changes, so many of them being harsh. But he didn't realize, he couldn't see the big picture, that God was doing something very, very important in his life for the benefit of many. So the next time you find yourself on a long, southbound on-ramp, facing loss, betrayal, illness, or fear, remember these lessons and proven biblical truths from Joseph's life. God is always about, present, active, and faithful. Hebrews 13:5, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Hold on, don't lose heart. God isn't finished yet. He's working a greater plan in his timing, greater than you can know. And we have a special thing today. Amechi said, I'll do communion. I said, okay, as long as you're here, that's cool. So Amechi is going to lead us in the communion today.